Hi, everyone. My name is Nasratullah Ghafouri. I'm a PhD candidate at Osaka University here in Japan, and I'm the moderator for today's session. Welcome to Exhibitor Track. For today's session, Mr. Adam Brown will have his speech on over a decade of software security, what we learned. So, a short introduction of Mr. Adam Brown. Adam has been measuring maturity of software security initiatives in financial, technology, and government organizations since 2019. So, if you have any question, please post your questions to the Q&A section on the top of this video to Wuha. I will ask your questions at the last 10 minutes of Q&A sessions, and Mr. Adam will answer it. And the chat functionality of Zoom is disabled for attendees. So if you would like to chat or comment, please use the Wuha in order to chat and comment. Over to you, Adam. Let's get started.
Okay, thanks, Nasrat. Just before I share my screen, then I'll just say hello so you can see me, because I think I will disappear. In my talk, I'm going to talk about the BSIM, which has been going on for nearly 14 years now, and I'm going to cover 5 things that I said I would in the preamble. That is how to measure software security. Security metrics, but really briefly, a little bit on holistic efforts, why more isn't always better, and then trends that we've seen in the last couple of years over the BSIM measurements that we've done. So I shall share my screen now. Please shout, Nazrat, if you don't see it.
Looking forward.
Excellent. Okay.
So.
Yeah, over a decade of software security, what have we learned? So let's just skip through that. What I want to do first of all is just differentiate between what BSIM is and who are Synopsys, because sometimes when I've done talks like this, people say, well, who's the company? Well, Synopsys is the company, and it sponsors the BSIM. The BSIM is an open project that, well, at least the output of it is open in terms of the document that is free to download and use as you wish. So Synopsys is a software security company. And BSIM is one of the strategic kind of tools that we use to measure the state of software security in companies today. So we of course deliver strategic consulting and tactical consulting, and as you might expect from any software security company, things like training, penetration testing, mobile assessments, and everything you see there. So that's enough about Synopsys. And let's just get straight into the BSIM. Okay, so BSIM 12, which is the current iteration of it, it's been going since 2008, so it's coming up to 15 years that it's been going on now. And in that time to date, we've done well over 550 assessments, and that's been contributions from 231 firms. The way it's done, it's interview-driven assessments, and they're done to aggregate the actual practices performed by the companies that make up the data pool that drives the BSIM into a single observational framework. So it's a really good way to identify the state of software security in the world today, and also how you might stack up against your peers or all of the other contributors. So just here's some of the contributing companies that work with us to do this. Not all of them obviously are listed there, and if you want to see a full list, well, a fuller list, download the BSIM. Not everyone is documented in there because for confidentiality reasons, some contributors don't want to be identified. It's mainly US, the data pool, 3/4 of it. And then in terms of the actual verticals that contribute, it's 20% software creators, software vendors, and the other, well, 28% is financial services and technology, with 10% of fintech and 18% being financial. So what is it? Well, we collect quantitative data. So this is what companies are doing. And these are the activities which I'm going to talk about in the first section of this talk. And then we also collect qualitative data. So this is, well, how are those companies achieving those things, those activities? And that's described in the description. So we organize this using something called the Software Security Framework. You might see, there are some similarities between SAM. That's also a software security maturity measurement tool. And with the BSIM, we have a similar thing. Instead of pillars, we have domains, starting with governance on the left-hand side. So everything that you need to manage the process, to deployment on the right-hand side, which is, like kind of engineering grassroots activities to ensure secure software. So, and then in the middle, of course, we've got practices. So intelligence. These are the smarts that you need, to create secure software. So there's things like attack models in there, and then SSDL touchpoints, which is what we all know is about software security. It's pipelines and activities around actually cutting code, and then deployment, which is where you might see software environments and configuration management, and of course pen testing, which we'll all be familiar with. So here are the practices. There are 12 practices. They're divided equally across the domains. So in governance, we look at strategy and metrics, compliance and policy, and training, and I won't read out the rest. You can see these slides later yourselves. There are 3 practices per domain. Now, inside each practice, we have a bunch of activities. So I shall just take an example here with training. So inside training, we have a handful of activities, and they're divided into levels. And each activity, of course, it's got a reasonably long name there, but it could be slightly ambiguous. So there's a description behind each and every activity to remove any ambiguation. So in here, we're looking at training level 1.1. You can see 76 of everybody that contributes to the data. 76 out of 128 contributors do this. And it just kind of, so this is where we're talking about software security awareness training. So it differentiates this, that this isn't obviously cybersecurity training. This is training that's made available to software engineers and anyone involved in the SSDLC to help them create secure software. So of course, this is split into levels. So level 1 activities are the most commonly observed activities. So of course they will be probably slightly easier to conduct, but the BSIM is a little bit different to other maturity models in that the levels aren't like do this harder, do this even harder still. It's the most commonly observed all the way through to the least frequently observed, and it could be less frequently observed because it could be a new activity, right? It could be something that we've detected people are doing that we want to measure against. It could be that it's actually really hard or quite specialist. So there's a number of reasons that you would have activities falling into different levels. So as part of the measurement, firms get a scorecard, and actually if you download the BSIM yourself, go to bsim.com and download it. And also I've got some QR codes at the end, or links that you can use to get direct access. I think there may be a paywall there, not a paywall, marketing wall, so you can get direct access. The scorecard drives the rest of the report. So all of the graphs that you'll see, and it just forms the state of the known state of software security in the firm that's just been measured. So you can have a go at the scorecard yourself. Look at all of the activities; they're all documented in the BSIM, and try and work out if your firm is observedly doing these activities or not. Just know that, of course, firms do tend to be maybe a bit lenient with themselves and maybe have an overall more positive score than actually a calibrated assessor like a synopsis assessor might be able to deliver for you. So yeah, there are 122 of these activities, so it takes some time to do these assessments. I'm in Copenhagen right now, and we've spent 4 days on site doing interviews. But the output gives leadership stakeholders context and structure and potential prioritization for activities that they might want to start, if they're not already doing. So I said we would talk about some metrics, because the BSIM is kind of in some ways a giant metric, or it can be, certainly if it's repeated. So organizations, we saw, are learning to translate their risk into numbers. We saw firms putting more effort into collection and publishing of their software security initiative data, demonstrated by a 30% increase in one of the activities, which is publish data about software security internally. We saw that increase over the last 24 months. And the activity is really about making information about what's happening when you're creating this software related to security activities, and then presenting that usually to executives, or even circulating it inside the organization to promote a culture of software security. So I just want to talk about metrics versus measures, because perhaps they're used too interchangeably in businesses. And some people assume that that someone is talking about one thing when they're talking about something else. So really, the way I like to think about it is I use fuel in a car. So that's a measure, right? If that gauge said 20 liters, all it tells me is I've got 20 liters. It's up to me then to work out what's that going to do for me. How far am I going to get? Whereas if I look at the metric from my car, it tells me, it doesn't tell me how many liters there are at all, actually. It just tells me how far I can go, depending on my known driving state. Am I driving really carefully or like a maniac? If this was an electric car, it would take into account things like temperature and so on. It gives you range. So the point of the parable is, if you as the driver or the executive, a CISO or something, you want the kind of information presented to you in the most easily digestible and actionable way. And that's the difference between a metric and a measure. Metrics provide a better comparative value over collections of measures. It gives consistency in observation process and consistency, of course, in meaning. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes on what security metrics must have and must not have. So the really must, for a software security measurement, there's no way, other way, it has to measure software development lifecycle compliance. Therefore, you need to get telemetry from primary gates, and then it must create a feedback loop to enhance the SSDL. It must look at the data, real data, and consider factors of the program execution and risk. What it should do is correlate data from multiple sources. It should strive for good time series data, so it should be repeated at a regular cadence, and compare the value of your efforts. It should test your theories, your intuitions, and perhaps it might prove them wrong, and it should tell your application security if it's done right. When metrics are broken, you've got to fix them. Otherwise, it's really quite pointless. You're going to tell people to go in the wrong direction, and they should ultimately enable you to maximize your spend on software security. And that's why you should avoid, just looking at the bottom bullet point here, rushing metrics development. If you put the time and effort into having a quality metrics program, it will be embraced by executives, and it will garner further investment, maybe even to your metrics program. They'll want more of that, but also into actually the software security initiative. So don't Don't complicate the numbers accidentally or intentionally, just put some quality in there. And absolutely don't make up the numbers, and really don't make up stories about made up numbers. So what does the BSIM tell us about metrics? What did we see firms in the data pool do? Well, we saw an increase in the published data about software security internally. So just 53% of firms in BSIM 12, although that's up from 39% in BSIM 9, are publishing data about their software security initiative within the organization. So if you compare that with 92% that have identified gate locations, so they've identified sources of data for their metrics, which is up from 84% in BSIM 9, they're not massively using that data to create metrics, although they're kind of on a journey in the last 2 or 3 years to do that. So only 16% of firms, and that's only up 1% from BSIM 9, are using metrics really formally enough to allow the firm to drive financial decisions about their software security initiatives. Okay, that said, I'll move on to the next section because we haven't got too long. This is about putting together a quality software security initiative. I just want to qualify this really. So the software security initiative is the thing that we're measuring, right? Now, that needs to have a software security group to drive it, and it needs sponsorship from executive management. But a software security initiative isn't just doing a bunch of things like, let's do a bunch of pen tests, or let's just make sure we code review everything. It's got to be fairly holistic. So if we look at this graph here, this is something that comes out of the BSIM report, and this one you can get directly from the BSIM report. You can download. It shows the activities around the clock related to the domains. So we've got the governance domain from 12 o'clock till 2 o'clock, intelligence from 3 till 5, and so on. So you get the picture. That's what the spider chart's telling you. You've got the practices inside each of those domains there. Ultimately, this is an aggregate of everybody that's in the data pool. So there are 128 participants, and we strive for data freshness. So if a firm hasn't remeasured within just under 3 years, then they're dropped from the data pool, because of course there's no point analyzing data that's 10 years old. We want to look at the state of software security initiatives today. So the 128 firms, this is kind of what they're doing. You can see there's a bit of a dip in attack models. Firms aren't necessarily doing that, but they've got a good grasp on standards and requirements. So ultimately, and of course you're going to see this with 128 firms all contributing to this average, you're going to see a fairly rounded shape. And when you perform your own measurement, really what you're also looking for is at least some kind of fairly rounded shape. And those rounded shapes aren't necessarily always that common. What we're seeing here in this graph is a comparison of different verticals from the data pool. So the green section is cloud firms, the light blue section is Internet of Things firms, and the purple section is software vendors. So you can see they've got slightly different shapes, and that's because of the different kind of market forces that are in play on them. Maybe they have to be heavily regulated, or maybe they're highly technical, and therefore get the technology right more quickly. So what you don't want to see in your score is big spikes or big drops, big troughs in there. Here's another way of looking at the data. This is what we call the equalizer chart. And it's a good way to identify, what you might call a hollow practice. So you've got the level 1 activities at the bottom, the level 2 activities in the middle, and in yellow, you've got the level 3 activities. This actually represents a fairly good holistic strategy, barring one thing. There's nothing happening in security testing, which is odd given how everything else seems to be fairly well rounded. They've got a good foundational set of level 1 activities and 2, and there's a smattering of level 3 activities. Another pitfall might be if you had a bunch of level 3 activities, but not the level 1 and 2 activities, you'd have to ask the question, certainly leadership would ask you, why are we doing all these like weird, not necessarily weird, sorry, but specialist, rare, less common things, but we're not doing the basics. So it's just a good way to measure out what you're doing. So a really useful metric for to prove your own performance here is what you can get from this graph. What we've got across the x-axis is buckets of scores. So you can score up to 122. There are 122 activities. I don't think anyone's ever scored 122, but some firms in the 61 to 122 bracket, there are 10 firms that have managed to get there. That's the rightmost bar. Whereas on the leftmost side, you've got some firms, there are, 12 firms have got a score between 0 and 20. Now, the orange line tells you the average age of the software security group that's driving the software security initiative inside the firm. So it stands to reason that those with a lower score have a more nascent group, whereas those with a higher score have got a much more mature group that's been in place for a fairly long time. Now, the green is in this case, this is this firm's measurement. They have scored 47, right? So they go into the 41 to 50 bucket. And the typical software security group age for that bucket is around about 4.5 years old. However, their software security group is only 3 years old. So they're outperforming their competitors or counterparts, depending on how you slice the data, right? This is everyone that's part of the data pool. But they're doing something right. They're doing something better, or they're doing something more quickly. Maybe they have more sponsorship. But it's a good way to measure your software security initiative. It's one metric at least anyway. Okay, so that's firms that are actually in play. Another useful thing that you can pull from the BSIM is how to kickstart, how to bootstrap a software security initiative. To pull yourself up by your own bootstraps is very hard, or as Baron von Munchausen here is doing, he's pulling himself out of a swamp by his own ponytail. It's about self-starting. So where would you start if you just started as an application security manager or director, and you were responsible for this initiative, which is software security in the firm? Well, what we saw was there are two types of software security initiative. There's a governance-led and there's the engineering-led. Add to that, in the report, we talk about emerging initiatives, so just starting from scratch. So these are firms that are taking ad hoc activities and moving to a more holistic strategy. We looked at maturing initiatives, so an existing initiative tied to executive expectations and they're tasked with improving things, all the way through to enabling SSIs. So this is software security initiatives that are achieving software security at scale of expertise and coverage and tool integration and accuracy and so on. So actually there are 6 different ways that you could pitch yourself. You could just be a beginner and governance led, or you could be maturing and engineering led. And there's some useful information in the BSIM for you to digest in there. If we look at what firms are doing, you can see the governance-led guys start with a compliance and policy type of activities. So one of the most important things that they'll do, and that I would say, well, it is vital for the success of a software security initiative, is to create the software security group, hire someone or get someone to take ownership of the software security initiative. And that person has to have a fairly close or direct reporting line to executive management. One of the things we look for is we collect data on the reporting line to the CEO, because no software security initiative will be successful without executive sponsorship. If you look at the bottom there, you've got the engineering-led kind of activities. So those guys start with things with low friction stuff. So the security features and design type of activities. So these are to integrate and deliver security features that engineers can just pick up and use in their own code, or they engage directly with the architecture teams to help them with things like threat modeling and design review. And then in the middle, we've got both engineering and governance led, which of course, yeah, if you work together, you probably start with more and you get better traction. So just to start with, so if you're a governance led person in a firm, and you've got to create this software security initiative for some reasons. Maybe there's an executive decision, we need to address software security. First thing you must do is put someone in charge of the software security initiative and give them what they need for success. Sponsorship with executives, probably some budget, some power. The next thing is to inventory your software. So know what you have, know where it is, and when it changes. Now, it's not just me saying these things. This is what we've observed firms doing. This is how firms do it, right? Then once you've inventoried, decide on the scope. You can't boil the ocean, so decide what you're going to focus on first and then contribute to its work streams. Regarding infrastructure, don't put good software on bad systems in poorly constructed networks. Of course, you've got to get that right, because those systems are typically cloud systems these days, but make sure the configuration is secure. Do perform defect discovery. So determine what today's issues are. What is your technical debt pile looking like? And then plan for tomorrow. It's always painful because you find things and it looks like things are bad, and engineering are going to complain because they've got extra work to do. But it is stuff that needs to be fixed, and then you've got to define how you're going to fix it. So you need to engage with development. So find those responsible for delivery pipelines or key designs or code pieces, and involve them in the planning and implementation and rollout at scale of your activities. So, and start with the controls that establish some risk management to prevent recurrence of the issues that you see today, right? So the things that you found in defect discovery, how are you going to prevent them happening in future? And that's where feedback loops start to come in place. And then implement your own feedback loop. Metrics are great for this as well. Start with a bite-sized approach, expand the team, improve your inventory, automate the basics, and then add more prevention, and then repeat again. So what about engineering-led? Well, there are some similarities, of course, inventory your software. And with scope, though, engineering-led groups have been observed using these three things as input for prioritizing their scope. So velocity, so teams conducting active and new development or major refactoring, there's an opportunity to move. Regulation, so services or data repositories with specific requirements for security or privacy. And opportunity, so teams solving critical technical challenges or adopting key technology can be proving grounds for emerging security controls. Again, don't put good software on poor infrastructure. And then choose your application controls that deliver the right features and prevent some classes of vulnerabilities. Software features, security features and design stuff, reusable libraries and authentication mechanisms, role-based access control systems, and so on. And again, repeat. So we're seeing the merging of governance-led and engineering-led efforts around software security, and it's something that we've definitely tracked in the BSIM, and we've seen that for the last 2 or 3 years. Historically, there was like this centralized governance view, a team at corporate, maybe called the AppSec team or the software security team or the product security team, and they were setting governance and buying tools and running them centrally and setting policy for build permits, and you could only get gate passage if the tool said it was okay. Now that was okay for the time, but now it's too slow and engineering moves too fast. Now we see that security is happening in the engineering organizations in firms, In engineering, there might be cloud security or container security or DevSec or SecOps. So these are the people that are popping up and growing inside engineering. So we have the rise of the second generation engineering-led security efforts. So, well, that's great. The thing is, these individual silos don't necessarily know what it means to manage the risk for an entire firm. So we see that we're soon driving towards a hybrid where centralized governance of application security and distributed, democratized engineering of application security must come back together so that we can agree on meeting both feature velocity and cadence in the engineering teams, but not risking the whole organization. In short, engineers don't see what puts the firm at risk, and governance guys don't have a view of what causes friction for engineering. So what we're seeing here with these three circles is it's a general view of two cultures that are often at odds. Engineering groups want to deploy application features and get quickly customer feedback, and governance groups want to manage risk across the entire application portfolio. So the diverging properties and priorities aren't going to go away, but DevSecOps can help stakeholders meet in the middle. And the new BSIM activities that we've been measuring are definitely reflecting this growing change. So, you know, DevSecOps has been talked about for years, and we're actually seeing it with science is proving that it's actually happening in the measurements that we're performing. So engineers want feature velocity, they want to automate first, they want resilience, they want to test in the value stream, and they don't want production environments to be sacred. Whereas the governance guys want rules and checkpoints and compliance and centralized testing, and they really want to remove all risk. But there are shared goals. For example, resiliency. It means something slightly different to each group. By and large, the engineers want resiliency so that software doesn't just fail at the first sign of adversity. Maybe the DNS went down or someone ran a chaos monkey against it. They want the software to be good and robust. By and large, the governance guys want to know if someone's attacking the firm through the software, they can do something about it, not necessarily through log analysis and incident management, but that the software is secure enough that it can protect itself against the attack. That is, it doesn't have the vulnerabilities in it in the first place that the bad guys are looking for. So while resiliency means slightly different things in each camp, it is somewhere where the two can come together. It can start to think, what does this mean for us instead of what it means independently? Because it considers risk, posture, tone at the top, resourcing, and other things. So in summary, putting tools into a CI/CD chain with some DevOps teams, it doesn't necessarily make DevSecOps. Hopefully what you can see is really about culture, and it's about integrating what you're doing. It's much more about just integrating tools. So final section really here, this is the trends that we've observed in software security activities. So we track these activities taken or facilitated by software security groups. And of course they change over time, and that's why we have this data freshness policy. And they change in line with software security group priorities. A good measurement interval for firms is about 24 months. Sometimes it's 18 months. So that means that, you know, they're doing a BSIM every couple of years. So let's then look at the differences between BSIM 12, the current iteration of BSIM, and BSIM 10 from a couple of years ago. So there's been an emphasis on supply chain software security. We're seeing that, obviously we hear about it marketing wise, but we're seeing it through the BSIM lens as well, through what we're observing. And of course, high profile ransomware attacks have probably driven that. Software security attacks are driving it, these increases in these related activities. So with regards to open source software, there's been a 60% increase in the identification of open source software, and then a control of the use of open source software. So commonly this is achieved using some automated tools to find binaries, whole libraries, or even snippets of cut and paste code that that engineers have used. I think what you can say is a few years ago, we used to say that there's no excuse for not doing static analysis. And it's fairly ubiquitous these days. These days, you can probably include software composition analysis in that statement too. So with vendors, there's been almost a 60% increase in the observation of firms putting software security specific service level agreements, SLAs, into their contracts to make sure that the vendors don't jeopardize the firm's compliance story or their actual, software security initiative. So provisions are typically around things like policy conformance, incident management, training, defect management, software issue response times. So they are, I mean, you probably will commonly find cybersecurity SLAs in there, but some, what we look for here is actually software security related stuff. So it could be training or doing code review and doing it properly. Okay, so SBOM is an acronym that's become very popular over the last few years. In the 2020s, Gartner had predicted that by 2024, the provision of a detailed, regularly updated software bill of materials by software vendors will be a non-negotiable for at least half of enterprise software buyers. And it has done, because we've seen this increase in the use of a software bill of materials. Of course, it's never practical as a manual effort, and firms are using tools to identify open source in the first place. One thing we didn't see is the automation of malicious code detection. In fact, only one firm out of 128 had actually successfully done this. It's hard, right? It needs the use of automation to detect things like backdoors, logic bombs, dangerous code like time bombs or nefarious communication channels, dynamic code injection, obfuscated program logic, anything that could be targeted as a backdoor attack. So custom rules in a static analysis tool can be used to codify acceptable and unacceptable code patterns. And while not all backdoors and similar kind of dodgy functionality were meant to be malicious, but they do tend to remain in deployed code and should be treated as malicious until proven otherwise. So hopefully we'll see an uptick in subsequent BSIMP measurements. There's been a shift towards continuous defect discovery and continuous effort. So we said years ago there's no excuse for no SAST, and now it's becoming no excuse for no SCA as well, and it's increasing, right? We're seeing DAST getting into pipelines, interactive application security testing getting into pipelines, cloud security posture management getting in right at the really in production in the last 24 months. We're seeing more granularity, the decomposition of these security gates. So instead of like one big one saying go, no go, there's been a drive to test early and test often. And this has seen firms decomposing efforts into smaller, timely checks. So data indicates important efforts like incremental security design efforts, conversion of manual effort to as code efforts, satellite outreach, and automated asset discovery are happening. So we've coined this phrase shift everywhere. There's been a realization that sometimes deployment, orchestration, or post-deployment environments are the earliest and best possible time to do some tests. So shift left, that we're so familiar with, it really becomes shift everywhere, or shift right, as in shift correctly, shift appropriately. It extends the idea of making security testing continuous throughout the software lifecycle. So that means smaller, faster, pipeline-driven security tests are conducted at the earliest opportunity. That could be at design, looking at the designs and breaking the design, or it could be all the way in production with cloud security posture management tools that are monitoring asset creation and configuration monitoring of those created assets. So finally, we're seeing governance of as code. In BSIM 12, observations indicate that sole source software security standards and policy documents, so those things that said thou shalt do this and must not do other things, are moving from document-based artifacts to becoming human-readable configuration code or simplified code that conducts vulnerability discovery. And this is really the essence of software development lifecycle governance, and that's been seen in we've seen a 15% increase in the last 2 years of firms doing that. Okay, so final slide now. There's some other trends that we observed, and a couple of things that we hoped for but didn't necessarily see too much of. There's been a shift away from mandating software security, big stick kind of approach, like you've got to use my tool because I bought it and the CEO says so, to more of a partnership kind of collaborative approach with sharing of staff and resources and knowledge and actually contributing directly towards software security efforts in the critical path of software delivery. There's been really significant increases in observation rates for the application, this activity, application containers to support security goals, and orchestration for containers and virtualized environments. That doesn't mean like, oh yeah, we're using Kubernetes, so we're secure. It's more of a case of that is an opportunity to make sure that your environment is secure through configuration, hardening, and benchmarking and standards and so on. We saw organizations are learning how to translate risk into numbers. We saw a 30% increase in the activity published data about software security internally. However, what we didn't really see a big increase in was the normalizing and deduplication of defect data and customizing testing tools. And that's important because that's about the quality of the data that you're reporting. So while firms are kind of getting some measurements and in some cases metrics, we probably need to see an increase in the quality of data that's going in, right? So if you automate noise reduction using aggregation tools and things to automate kind of false positives being triaged correctly, and then if you actually customize testing tools so they don't come up with inaccurate results in the first place, then we can see metrics get even better. There were very few instances of normalizing and deduplicating defect data and customizing testing tools. So anyway, next thing was that there was we didn't see the creation of context-aware security requirements. So this includes the use of pre-approved security frameworks and design patterns and abuse cases. So secure patterns that the engineers can use and the security features that you could just roll into your code. Okay, excuse the drill noise. Sorry, it's a noisy hotel, this one, it seems. So, in conclusion, well, first of all, please do take a look at the BSIM. All of this information that I've presented is in that report. There's a Trends and Insights report. That's almost like the TLDR version. And then there's a Foundations report, which is a fairly weighty tome with all of the activities inside of it. So, in summary, you can't, there's no switch to turn security on. You can't just say, hey, can I have that but in secure mode? You really must build it in. And increasingly, we're seeing automated ways to do that. The goal should be auditable governance as code. Automating manual compliance adherence tasks makes them more consistent, efficient, and repeatable. use metrics, use them to help the decision makers make the right decision about software security. I guess it's easy to say, oh, the guys at the top don't know what's going on, but you really have to kind of, maybe it feels like doing the job for them, but you know, you're as the kind of experts on the ground, you can actually translate it into terms that they can really understand. So consider multiple disciplines, cloud, containers, orchestration, security, source content management, and measure what you can and make it as relevant as possible for the firm to make decisions. Have the right activities running at the right time. So implement small phase-based security activities throughout the life cycle rather than using big, slow pass-fail gates that delay pipeline progress. And then use the telemetry that comes from these things, gather data on what tests ran, what was found, and use that to drive improvements. Where you should start. So yeah, if you are starting out, if you're optimizing, or if you're actually doing really well, there's information in the BSIM that can help you in that. Not that we as the custodians of the data will directly tell you, it's more what your peers in the data pool are doing, and you know, it could give you some ideas as to where to go next. So finally, as we've seen with BSIM, maturation continues, and we look forward to seeing what BSIM firms are doing in when we release BSIM 13, which will be towards well, probably in the autumn of this year. Okay, so thank you very much. I think I've finished in just about enough time. If there's any questions, please yeah, well, let me hand over to Nasrat, who can tell you what to do about questions.
Well, Adam, thank you very much for the great presentation. Tons of information, and I really enjoy. Thank you so much. So I would look into the participants' questions, and probably if you can take your time, maybe we have 10 minutes to answer the participants' questions. So we got a question. It says, what are the major difference between SAM and BSIM?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So SAM is, I think they were created around about the same time, actually. SAM has got a bunch of activities. It's got domains and practices, but it perhaps lacks a data pool. So it's perhaps a bit prescriptive. Whereas BSIM is different in that it's descriptive. So it measures what's happening in the industry, and then that shapes the BSIM. So what you might find is, you know, SAM quite rightly might take some of the new activities that are observed as growing in the BSIM and use that. I think that yeah. So the major difference is it has a data pool behind it, and therefore it's descriptive. And it is, yeah, but similarity wise, it is a report that we put out every year. I don't know if SAM do that, I guess they do, which can help you define your software security initiative. But I'd say prescriptive versus descriptive.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me move to the second question from the audience. So the second question is, who can deliver BSIM assessment?
Well, the good news is you could try it for yourself. So there's a scorecard in there, and there's all the activities in there, and all the descriptions in there. So there's nothing to stop you spending time to do an initial assessment. And sometimes, you know, for nascent software security initiatives, might be, even if you spoke to somebody in Synopsys, they might actually turn around and say, don't do a BSIM with us, just go and start yourself, because, you know, we can probably tell you now your score is going to be quite low. So go and work out what you need to do to shape your SSI, to kick it off, and then maybe get a proper measurement in a couple of years. So in terms of who else can measure it, do a direct measurement? Well, of course we do, and we're the custodians of the data pool. If you are measured, your data can go into that data pool, and it's how to become part of the BSIM club, if you like. There's a conference and forums and so on that are pretty active. I guess some consultants, independent consultants, would do that. You would miss the data pool. You would miss the collaboration. Sorry, not collaboration, calibration. So as a calibrated assessor, the idea is whether you use me or one of the consultants in New York, within a couple of points, we should come up with the same score. We actually, the interviews are driven usually with three assessors, all calibrated. Whereas if you're not part of the calibration process, you can't guarantee that the score is going to be really an accurate reflection of what everybody else in the data pool would have scored if they use Synopsys.
Thank you, Adam. And we got a question, and it says, my company is a bit specialist. How can the BSIM can relevant to companies who are not mainstream?
So when the BSIM started in 2008, it was with the 9 original firms in the US. So think of some big names and you can probably work out who they were. We're talking about financial services organizations on the East Coast, and software companies, cloud companies on the West Coast. And the original thought was we're going to have 2 models, because surely banks make, deal, maintain software in a very different way to software companies. And after doing these measurements and creating the software security framework, it was realized that actually, no, ultimately, they're all producing software. They might be doing it in slightly different ways, but you can really harmonize a lot of the activities that are happening, which is what we've done with the activities and continue to do every year. So there's no special snowflakes, if you like. I think if you're creating software, if you're maintaining software, it's relevant. If you're not doing that, then yeah, it doesn't make sense. But we have in the data pool everything from like IoT vendors, telcos, cloud service providers, all the way through to banks and governments. There's 122 activities. No one ever really scores 122 altogether, although some do score quite highly, because some of the perhaps specialists, more slightly specialist for activities like highly governed organizations will probably do better in governance, whereas super technical telcos might do better with technical testing and so on. But it fits everybody, every firm.
Well, thank you very much. I think we got 2 questions and probably we won't have time. So it's the end of probably the QA session. So do you have something extra to add, Adam?
No, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your attention today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure is mine. Thank you very much. So let's wrap up this session, probably the first session of Exhibitor track.